Welcome to Native Exiles, Alderwood Community Church's podcast, where we talk about following Jesus and the tension of being in the world, but not of it. We have an amazing guest today, Curtis Chang, and he is the host of the Good Faith podcast, which you may have heard before, but more recently, he's the author of a book called The Anxiety Opportunity. And we have a great conversation today around anxiety and around how so many of us just have a completely wrong perspective about what our goal with anxiety should be. He was really helpful to me in thinking through this. I think he will be for you as well. Let's jump in. Curtis Chang, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me, Wyatt.
Well, I'm really excited to talk about your book, The Anxiety Opportunity. And I'm wondering, for folks who don't know you, maybe haven't had an opportunity to engage with the book at all, would you just share a little bit about your story with anxiety and why you wanted to write a book on this?
Yeah, I wanted to write this book because I myself have had a life that has been significantly shaped by my own struggles with anxiety. I write in the book this story about why among the many things that you can list in my bio, one of the things is often listed is I'm a former senior pastor of a evangelical covenant church in the Bay Area. And the former is there because of anxiety.
Yeah.
I actually suffered basically a breakdown, fueled especially by my anxiety disorder that I didn't even realize at the time.
Wow.
And it got especially bad such that had such sort of catastrophic impact such that I ended up having to end my ministry career because of it, really because I did not rightly understand and therefore wasn't experiencing my anxiety, I think, in the way that we as human beings were designed by God to experience it, that I'd gotten really distorted and misshapen in my spiritual conception of anxiety. And that was actually a big reason why it got so bad. And as I reflected more on my experience, I realized I wasn't alone in that many Christians have been taught just frankly the wrong things about anxiety, the wrong ways to think about it, believe about it, experience it spiritually and so forth, as well as behaviorally and all that. And so I wanted to write a book out of that experience, especially recognizing that we are in the midst of an anxiety epidemic. All of the mental health statistics show this sort of dramatic rise in anxiety, especially, but not reserved to our youth. And so clearly we're doing something wrong because we're throwing actually, more and more energy, attention, dollars. Churches are preaching, having sermon series like you are on this, and it's been true for years. And yet, you still see these anxiety rates at very high levels and even rising. And so there's something fundamentally wrong about how we're even constructing anxiety and its relationship to faith, especially. And so I wrote the book to try to get at the foundations of that.
Yeah.
What I think is a misconstruction.
I think that's so interesting. You were a pastor of a church, been following Jesus, I'm sure, for some amount of time at that point. I'm sure anxiety was something that you were aware of, but what was the false idea of anxiety that you had at that point? What was the misconception that you think was hindering you?
You can get at it by the title of the book that I wrote, which is called The Anxiety Opportunity. And that immediately strikes most people, Christians or non-Christians, but I think especially as Christians, as what? The anxiety opportunity? Because we have been sort of formed to think of anxiety as a problem, not an opportunity, but a problem. And that problem even can have spiritual kind of a coloring to it, such that anxiety is actually a sign of lack of faith, or you're not praying enough, right? And so there's this idea that anxiety is a problem. And once you conceive of it as a problem, whether it's a lack of faith or not praying enough or a character flaw or something like that, then immediately you're looking for a solution, right? That's what we want to a problem. And because of especially the way Western Americans are, the kind of solution we think is the adequate solution to a problem is elimination. So you get rid of that problem is the effective solution. So immediately, once you start thinking of anxiety as a problem, you're looking for a solution, then you're looking for ways to eliminate. And really right now, I would say in the church, we have two main elimination um, prescriptions that are advanced. So one of them is to pray it away, and the other is to prescribe it away. So the pray it away stays in that very spiritual sense that it's a spiritual problem, and therefore you need to pray it away. You don't have enough faith. You need to read the right scriptures, meditate on the right truths about God, and then that will make it go away. You'll pray it away. I think a lot of churches actually have sort of evolved out of that. They've sort of embraced the broader secular trends that have been trying to destigmatize mental health issues like anxiety, and so maybe they've moved away from pray it away, which I think is progress. But instead, they've adopted the secular cultural version of treating anxiety solely as a problem. And here I want to just emphasize, I'm talking about constructing it solely as a problem.
Yeah.
Anxiety has problematic aspects to it, but when we treat it solely as a problem, that's when we go down this road of problem, solution, and elimination. And the secular version of elimination is not pray it away, of course, it's prescribed it away. And we prescribe it away either with drugs or with therapy are the most obvious prescriptions. And again, here, let me say, those are good things. I took anti-anxiety drugs. I did a lot of therapy. They're helpful things. But when we engage with them with this framework of, okay, this is meant to make it go away, to make this experience of anxiety go away, we're still in that same trap of thinking it's a problem, I need a solution, and that solution must eliminate it. And that's really the trap, is because if we think of anxiety as a problem that requires a solution that eliminates it, we're going down a very bad track. Whether it's the Christian church version of pray it away or the secular version of prescribe it away, we're in a danger of actually just making it worse.
Yeah. I think that's so true. I mean, I think most people who have any awareness of dealing with anxiety, whether it's a huge problem in their life or it's just maybe a smaller problem of, really been struggled in acute ways from time to time or whatever, anyone who's tried to eliminate it, I think has probably found that it's certainly not easy, maybe not even possible to completely do away with anxiety. It seems to be just a part of how we're wired as human beings.
Well, it's actually worse than that, Wyatt. I mean, the studies and experience shows not only does it ineffectual, you make it worse.
Yeah.
Because what you're doing is it's like you're getting on a hamster wheel where you're searching for a solution that you never arrive at. So you have to furiously inject more and more energy, effort into it. So if you think the goal is, I have to eliminate anxiety, you're getting on a spiritual, behavioral, and sometimes actually, honestly, a pharmaceutical
Yeah.
treadmill that
Well,
actually
and it adds shame to the mix as well.
and it
Because
adds shame to the mix. Makes it
if
worse.
you think you're supposed to be able to fix it and you're trying and you can't, then you also have to deal with what's wrong with me now
Right.
that I can't do this. And I can only imagine that as a pastor, that was to the nth degree of that reality of like, I'm supposed to be leading a church and helping people. I should be able to deal with anxiety and I'm not. I mean, did you experience that?
Oh, absolutely. That's why I think I didn't get the help I needed to handle anxiety, which, by the way, and to experience anxiety, which is a different thing than making it go away.
Yeah.
Right? Is how do I actually experience it? How do I hold the experience of anxiety versus eliminate it? But because I thought I was supposed to eliminate it, and because I had subscribed to the pray it away model, I was replacing the former founding pastor of the church. So already there was a lot of pressure to be like, I
Yeah.
can be the guy that actually, can fill these footsteps. So there's a lot of pressure already. And then if you operate with this idea that anxiety is a sign of, again, lack of faith, not praying enough, then really, if I'm saying, yeah, I'm really struggling with anxiety, I'm really, transparent with that. I'm basically saying, yeah, your new senior pastor doesn't have enough faith, isn't praying enough. And
Yeah.
so that was a big reason why I just kept suppressing this experience. I kept giving it other names or re-narrating it. I'm stressed. I have a lot of work to do, and yeah, I'm not sleeping enough. When really missed the underlying issue, which was I was experiencing greater and greater levels of anxiety, and the harder I
Yeah.
was trying to suppress it, the more anxious I was getting.
Wow. Okay, let's talk about the shift a little bit. So, if anxiety is not just a problem to be dealt with, you're making the case, you're arguing that it is an opportunity. So, convince those of us that are skeptical of that. How is anxiety an actual opportunity in our life?
Well, I'll explain it both from scripture and then also from sort of experience and common sense, right? So from scripture, I did this very interesting study where if we think that spiritual growth is cutting closer to Jesus, right? Which I think is a good definition of spiritual growth,
Yeah.
getting closer to Jesus, approaching Jesus. And I'm making the case anxiety is an opportunity for spiritual growth. I'm really saying anxiety is an opportunity for us to approach and get closer to
Mhm.
Jesus. Well, to test that hypothesis, I did a study which I outline in the book, looking at the Gospel of Mark and all the different ways that people approach Jesus. And I especially filtered out, for people who are approaching Jesus in good faith, people who are approaching Jesus personally. So not the Pharisees who are trying to trap him, not the crowds, but just people, individuals or small groups of people who are approaching Jesus in good faith, wanting to get closer to him. And in the book of Mark, you find 29 such approaches.
Hmm.
Out of those 29 approaches, 15 of them show strong, what I'm calling textual evidence of anxiety. So there's something in the text itself, in the story itself, that is a sign of anxiety. Either they themselves are saying they were troubled. Jesus'
Yeah.
response to them is be at peace, which shows that Jesus saw them. They were not at peace. Or there's often there's a key verb that they implored Jesus, which is a verb in
Hmm.
the Greek that suggests a great agitation and distress. So more than half of the approaches to Jesus are already characterized by anxiety. And then another 12, in addition to that, are characterized by what I call possible, maybe not definite, but very possible evidence of anxiety. So the classic case would be the friends who bring the paralytic to Jesus in Mark 2. They are tearing a hole through a stranger's house in order to lower Jesus. That's not exactly a calm, collected approach, right? So they're clearly very agitated. So examples of like that. So there's actually 15 and 12. So that 27 out of 29 approaches to Jesus, you could say either have definitive or very suggestive signs of anxiety. There's only two that don't, and I won't explain those two, but those are interesting examples because one of them is kind of like an irony because it's Peter who actually a paragraph later is actually showing a great deal of anxiety. It's what Peter says to Jesus, "I'll never deny you. I'm good."
Yeah.
So he's suppressing some of his own, I think, hidden anxiety there. So so from a biblical perspective, the Gospels are filled with anxious people approaching Jesus through their anxiety. They're not called to get rid of their anxiety and then get closer to Jesus. It's not viewed as an obstacle. It's viewed as the very context, the very doorway to approaching Jesus is anxiety. And the range of anxiety is really broad spread. It's physical, provisional, status anxiety, spiritual anxiety of all sorts. So that's the biblical argument. And then there's more that I could bring out from the Old Testament about, Psalm 139 that says, "Search me and know my anxious thoughts," right? So the presumption is I will have anxious thoughts. The
Yeah.
whole opportunity there is that those anxious thoughts are a way for God to actually search us, know us better. So there's a lot of biblical examples like that. But so I hope that helps at a biblical level. And if you want, I can talk more about why I think this holds together in our experience. So.
Well, I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, there's this really clear-eyed way that the scriptures has acknowledged that we are anxious, we're going to be anxious, the people coming to Jesus are anxious. This is so cliche, so I mean, forgive me, but you're a pastor, probably like the single greatest biblical hang up to people accepting that reality is Jesus teaching us not to be anxious about anything. And so how do you put those two biblical realities together? Like how do you hear Jesus teaching us about anxiety in that?
Well, that and like the Philippians 4:6 are
Yeah.
the do not be anxious about anything of the two verses. So I won't go into great detail because my book, again, I hate to be the guy that's like, hey, read the book, but the exegesis of those passages in Philippians 4:6. A great extent is just well, first of all, in the Philippians 4:6, it's clear when Paul says, "Do not be anxious about anything." It does not mean I am expecting you never to be anxious, and that is a sin to be anxious, right? Because a few verses, a couple chapters before, he says, "I am anxious about Epaphroditus, sending
Yes.
Epaphroditus to you." So it would be very odd for Paul to say, when I say don't be anxious, I mean that's a sin, that you should not feel anxious when he just talked about how anxious he was, right? So it's an encouragement but it's not an expectation that you're never going to feel anxious, right? In
Yeah.
fact, the encouragement is given precisely because the expectation is this is something you're going to experience. And then so you really need to unpack what's around that encouragement. And it's a much deeper path of spiritual growth than somehow I'm not supposed to feel this way. I shouldn't be feeling this way. I by my willpower or by prayer or some ginning up of some faith that doesn't exist within me, I'm going to make it all go away. It's not that. It's something deeper and profound. And this really gets to um, the fundamental question, why, what is anxiety? And this is really important for us to actually grasp that anxiety at its heart, why, as you said, it's a natural human condition, is what anxiety is simply our body and somewhat our minds, but especially bodily, reacting to the prospect of loss, to the prospect that we may lose something we value, our health, our relationship, our well-being, financial resources, something. Anxiety is the fear of loss. Okay. It's a fear of loss that will come, that we think will come in the future. It's not something happening right now. It's something our fear will happen in the future. So this is why it's so crucial for us not to treat anxiety along the problem, solution, elimination line. Because if you say that anxiety is a problem that ultimately must be eliminated, what you are saying to yourself, all right, is loss is something that must be eliminated. The possibility of loss in my life must be eliminated. That's really what you are saying to yourself, consciously or subconsciously, when you say, I can't feel this way. I shouldn't feel this way. I've got to get rid of this feeling. Say, I cannot tolerate the experience of loss. And this gets to, there's the central spiritual opportunity for growth. My book talks a lot about other opportunities for growth it helps us learn more about ourselves, what's going on. It helps us understand, kind of our pasts. There's a tremendous amount of opportunity, but this is a central one. Is it actually, it's an invitation in anxiety that Jesus is inviting us to say, how are you going to face loss in your life? And here's where it's so crucial, because too many Christians have bought, consciously or subconsciously, a false version of the gospel, which is some version of a promise that God never made, that you will never experience loss, right? That if you pray enough, if you have enough faith, you will never experience loss. That's actually what people mean when they say pray it away. It's pray so that the thing you fear losing will not happen. We'll make it go away. And that's just something that is never promised. In fact, we are promised the exact opposite, Wyatt. We are promised we will lose. We will lose all in life. That's what it means when Jesus says, anyone who follows me must take up their cross and die. Death is the loss of all things, right? So our life is going to experience loss if we are trying to live our life, whether in our financial life, our relational life, and especially our spiritual life, such that we eliminate the possibility of grievous, painful, fearful loss in our life. We are trapping ourselves on that hamster wheel. We'll never get there. And that's going to lead to greater and greater anxiety. Instead, the spiritual opportunity is to actually go through loss, to go through the very real possibility, frankly, inevitability of loss, but to do so with Jesus. That is the place, that is the context, that is the doorway by which we meet Jesus, is really at those places in our life that we fear loss. And the promise is not Jesus saying with some fairy dust, and you trust me, you'll never experience that loss you fear. It's, we can go through this loss together because I've gone through it before already in my own death. And I've shown that there is another side to this, that no loss is final because I have defeated death. And there is the resurrection on the other side.
Yeah, I find that so helpful because once you can realize that anxiety is a response to the fear of loss, it really does kind of lay bare how futile it is to try to eliminate anxiety because there's always going to be potential loss in your life. The only way for you to not fear losing anything is to not value anything, to not love anything.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
And so if you want to love things, you want to enjoy life, you're going to have to deal with the fact.
You're signing up for anxiety.
Yeah,
I'm sorry to say.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think part of the reason why I think that might be so hard for people, though, to wrap their mind around is I think part of what can alleviate some of that anxiety is the gospel, the reality that Jesus proves on the cross that he's for us, that he loves us, that nothing can separate us from the love of God because of Jesus, that we have a Father in heaven who delights in giving us good things and will protect us and take care of us. But it's how do you marry that with the reality that and you're going to experience great loss in this life? You know,
Yeah.
God can protect you from anything, but he's not going to protect you from
No.
everything.
Yeah.
And so how do you draw near to God through loss rather than letting your loss be something that is really a problem in your relationship with God, it lead to anger and bitterness and
Yeah.
distance between you and God?
Well, that's why every experience of anxiety is an opportunity for spiritual growth, because it's like every time we experience that in a little way, we have to clarify in our head, wait a minute, what kind of relationship is this? Is this essentially a mechanistic relationship with a great sort of um, dispenser in the sky with a some supplier of outcomes in the sky that if we push the right buttons they will then this God out there will supply loss avoidance in my life, right, which is
Yeah.
fundamentally a mechanistic relationship with God versus a relationship with our Father who is present with us, who is with us, present with us. And we can get some signs about what a relationship between of Heavenly Father and us as His children is. We can get some clues about that for anybody who is a parent themselves. I'm a father of two daughters. One of my daughters right now is going through some real chronic health struggles, right? And I cannot make them go away. I can help her deal with it. I can be with her. I can support her. I cannot make those problems go. They're chronic,
Hmm.
and that's an image though of kind of a dimension that heavenly heavenly Father can be the same way. Just because a father does not whisk everything and make it all go away does not mean that father doesn't love you. For like, and there's a great mystery here, of course, right? Why does God answer some prayers for loss avoidance? And He does. So there's some answer, and then some He doesn't. And it really it pushes us, it invites us to a deeper relationship with a person versus a provider of outcomes, right? There's a difference between a supply chain and a father and a parent. And anxiety is actually a great, when we experience anxiety, it's like a moment to say, am I treating God as a supply chain? Like that I just want them to deliver, the great Amazon in the sky. If I
Yeah.
just click prayer, then I can get something that will make this problem go away.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. So for people who maybe are closer to where you were at in your story on anxiety with Jesus when you were having that crisis as the pastor of the church that you were at, and they they're seeing anxiety as a problem to be eliminated. It's a recurring thing in their life. It's one of the big crises that they're going through. What are some practical steps that can be taken to start to shift mindset here, to start to see anxiety as an opportunity and not just as something to be eliminated?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, yeah, again, it's like read my book. That's not. I mean,
Yeah. In addition to that, yeah.
in addition to that, I do think there does need to be a mindset switch. Okay, I think there's a lot of behaviors and actions, but there needs to be a mindset because if your mind is still locked into anxiety is a problem. I need a solution that eliminates it. You're going to be on that hamster wheel. So and if it's not my book, it's reflect on the scriptures, reflect on Psalm 139, reflect
Yeah.
on all these gospel stories of anxious people coming to Jesus. But I do think that mindset needs to change. And then I do think there are actual concrete practices that actually grow our spiritual capacity to tolerate anxiety, to endure it, to experience it, not to make it go away, but to actually experience it and hold it with Jesus and with other people. So, for example, the breath prayer. I write about this in the book. Is actually breathing and a breathing, especially done in a spiritually intentive, conscious way, has a remarkable power to actually allow us to hold anxiety when it comes. Um, I would say, also anxiety, because it is the fear of loss, we are not designed to actually face loss by ourselves.
Mm.
And then we're not designed that way. It's not good for man to be alone is kind of the point. When Jesus experienced anxiety, and by the way, here, if you want the clinching proof why anxiety is not a sin or a problem to go away, read the gospel passages on Gethsemane, or John's version of that moment in Jesus' life in John 12, where Jesus is talking about how troubled in spirit he is, so much so that he's sweating. One has even that he's sweating blood, and he's
Yeah.
grieved unto death, and he's experiencing anxiety in the face of his loss that he's going to experience. He's experiencing all the symptoms of anxiety. What does he most want? First and foremost, he wants to pray, to be present with Jesus, to be present with his Father, so he's not alone in his most important relationship. But secondarily, what does he ask? He asks his disciples to stay here and be with me, right? Even Jesus is being so fully human that he is expressing the reality. We're not meant to go through the prospect of loss alone. So finding relationships that where you can actually go through the fear, the prospect of loss. For some people, that's really the real benefit of therapy, right? Is it's a structured relationship where you are with somebody who can help you take you through loss, the prospect of loss, not alone, right?
Yeah.
And so that's
I'm,
a great step to take.
I'm
Uh,
curious
yeah.
in that understanding that we need our community, we need brothers and sisters in Christ, we need a church community. To people listening who maybe they're not walking through the valley right now, but they want to be that community for the people that God's put in their life. Like, what advice would you offer us? Like, what are the things that can actually help us be gifts to people in the midst of anxiety and not burdens?
Yeah, well, one, of course, is you yourself, if you want to be helpful, need to undergo the sort of mindset shift. Because if you think it's a problem, then you're going to want to get that person to either solve it for that person, which you won't be able to do so, or you'll be increasingly frustrated that they're not solving the problem, right?
Yes.
This is especially true, like if you're really close, because you're really like, I want them to feel this way. If you're a parent of an anxious teen, I have a whole chapter on parenting anxious children and why it's important for parents to deal with their own anxiety. Because actually, what's going on a lot of those times is that your children's anxiety is making you anxious, and you're getting caught in this anxiety loop back and
Yep.
forth with each other. So a lot of this is you have to deal with your own stuff and deal with your own sort of framing, misconstruction of anxiety. And then I think a lot of it is actually not trying to solve it for them, but to be present with them. Like it's the disciples with Jesus, where Jesus just wants to say, "Be here with me. Go through this with me. I'm not asking you to make this go away. In fact, your attempts to make it go away, like wielding a sword, is not what I'm looking for here." I think it's adopting and learning to be present with people who are anxious because they are facing or fearful of some real loss in their life. And how do we actually be present to each other in that way?
Yeah, that's really good. How long has it been in your life since that crisis moment that you talked about in the beginning of our conversation today?
Let's see, that would have been almost getting close to 20 years now. Yeah.
Wow. Wow. And I'm curious, for people who, like I said, maybe relate more to you at the beginning of that story. I mean, when you reflect on that moment in your life, how different does it feel from how you are handling anxiety now? And how much does it feel like, it's still a big part of your day-to-day relationship with the Lord and it's changed in some ways? But I mean, yeah, I guess, how much progress do you think is realistic for someone to expect that they might make in this area of their life?
I think there's a tremendous amount of progress. I'm no, I would be uh, contradicting myself to say, hey, I no longer experience anxiety.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
do. It's because why? Because I still face loss. Just the other night, like as I shared with you, thinking about my daughter and dealing with her health situation, I felt a lot of anxiety welling up within me. But and maybe this is a helpful distinction, Wyatt. It's important to distinguish between anxiety and anxiety disorder. Those are two different things. Anxiety is that experience I had last night where, my daughter is experiencing this loss. I'm feeling all sorts of my own losses. That's making me feel anxious. That's anxiety. Anxiety disorder is when we can actually no longer handle. We can't
Yeah.
hold, we can't tolerate that experience of anxiety, and we're going to all sorts of other dysfunctional responses trying to make that feeling go away because we think we can't hold it, we can't endure it. And so I would say I still experience anxiety. I don't think I can remember the last time I've in the last let's say 10 years, 15 years, where I've had an episode of an anxiety disorder, right? A panic attack, a sense of I'm out of control. Um, Probably for me, it shows up most in sleep. That's my canary in a coal mine.
Yeah.
And we're going to all have our different ones on that. And so, based on that metric, I think I can say, look, you can absolutely make progress such that first of all, you experience less anxiety disorder. You also actually end up experiencing less anxiety, not a good elimination, but lesser levels, because you're not getting on the treadmill. You're not getting
Right.
on the ways that you accelerate levels. I think the anxiety I feel now feel actually more appropriate. They feel more like right size to the reality of the loss that I feel versus being multiplied by my avoidance sort of temptation.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad to hear that. And I'm the reason I asked is because I think one of the easiest lies for people to believe in the midst of real struggles with anxiety is that this is just how it's going to be. That I can pray, I can, go try to get medication prescribed, I can do the habits that people tell me, but like this is my reality. And I think understanding that there really is opportunity for growth. There really is opportunity for Jesus to work in your life, to handle anxiety in a different way and create space and invite him into that it really will make a difference in your life, I think is the hope that people need.
I think if I could just add a final comment on that, is my encouragement to people on that is, one, it will take time.
Yeah.
It will take time. Now, you can take a drug that can immediately lower the physical symptoms of anxiety. And that's if you're in the deep in anxiety disorder, absolutely do it. It can be a helpful complement to it. But the deeper work of changing ourselves to be people like Jesus who can go through loss with him, with the Father, right? That just takes time. And that's the nature of spiritual growth. So for anxiety to become an opportunity for spiritual growth is taking a long game perspective. Please don't go out and buy my book if you think it's like some magic solution that will make your anxiety disappear right away. It's not that. So one, it will take time. It will require effort, because all growth requires some participating effort on our part that partners with the Spirit of God, and the Spirit of God will be present in all this movement, and that it will change you. You will be a person that is stronger in your faith, in your relationship with Jesus, because anxiety is, I think, one of the, if not, I would say it is the most potent opportunity for spiritual growth.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Curtis, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Great. We'll cut it there. Thank you. And yeah, just really appreciate it. This is going to be helpful for our folks, and we'll link to the book in the bio, and yeah, I'm excited for people to engage with you on this.
All right, Wyatt. Blessings on your ministry.
Thanks. You too. See ya. Well, that was Curtis Chang. I hope you enjoyed that conversation and it was helpful to you. We'll throw a couple links in the show notes today. One, a link to his book, The Anxiety Opportunity, also to the Good Faith podcast, which he hosts every week and is a great resource for you as well. And finally, if you want to find all of Curtis's work, you can find that at his website, redeemingbabel.org. Thank you for listening today. If you think this might be of help to others, please share it and tell people about the podcast. And we will look forward to seeing you next time on Native Exiles.